Well, I don't mean to forego decorum, but I had to take my suit coat off because I don't think our air conditioner is working today. So apologies for that. We'll get after it tomorrow morning. So I either sweat a lot like this or I sweat a terrifying amount if I keep it on. So this is for you. All right. Well, that gospel. Some good news, huh? You know, Jesus is especially spicy in these chapters of Luke. These are difficult chapters. And if you've been going to church this last month, we've been coming into contact with these seemingly confrontational passages. And if you have been coming to church this last month, you may feel a little worn down or called out. And yet again, today, Jesus doesn't really let up. I almost have an apologetic tone here, but I preach to myself just as much as any of you with this text. And this text, once more, not easy. It complicates our sentimental pictures we sometimes have of Jesus, doesn't it? One biblical scholar even says, if you were to list the 10 most difficult sayings of Jesus in the Gospels, this would undoubtedly be on the list, where Jesus says, I came to bring fire to the earth. Do you think I have come to bring peace? No, division. That doesn't sound like the Jesus we often hear about at Christmas or Bible camp, does it? So what's going on here? Well, first we need to be clear. Jesus isn't saying that division is his goal. This isn't prescriptive, it's descriptive. As an old professor, Terence Fretheim, would say, this isn't prescriptive, it's descriptive. Jesus is not telling us what he wants to have happen. He's warning us about what will happen when we or people engage his type of work seriously. In other words, he's offering a warning. Following him has social, cultural, and political consequences. And I have to be very clear about something after I say something like that. When I say that following Jesus will have consequences, I first want to dispel something. Folks, Christianity in our country is not a persecuted identity. There is a myth of victimhood that some Christians in the United States have perpetuated. Ironically, this myth tends to be from very powerful Christians. But folks, Christian identity is not oppressed in this country. Lest that we think it is, remember that Christianity has overwhelming, if not complete in some cases, overwhelming representation in all three branches of government. An oppressed religion doesn't have that. Christianity has representation not only in government, but in corporate America, in pop culture, in media, radio, movies, literature, and heck, even billboards on just about every highway in this country. Christianity might be the least persecuted identity in American life. Just because the occasional atheist or other religion periodically criticizes us, and just because there's a separation of church and state does not mean that we are oppressed. And I want to say, it is not a sin to be oppressed, but it is a sin to pretend to be. So we Christians should be real careful in our context with claims of victimhood. With that established, now let's re-engage Jesus' point, where he warns of social, cultural, and political consequences of following him. He is making it clear that his mission and his vision will clash with the status quos of power. People in power want to keep their power and prosperity. So when you comfort the afflicted and you afflict the comfortable, not everyone will be thrilled. And you'll likely face some really divisive moments. In Jesus' day, this was not theoretical. One scholar explains, quote, "Those who followed Jesus were regularly thrust into conflict and division. If you were Jewish, it meant accepting as the Messiah this itinerant rabbi who hung out with prostitutes, tax collectors, drunks, and other sinners. And if you weren't Jewish and you hung out with him, this meant you were accepting someone who looked almost nothing like what the Roman culture held out as powerful. Jesus didn't look like someone you'd naturally admire or follow. He was homeless. He lived off the hospitality of others. His friends were a rough crowd. And most divisively, and as we've heard over and over again for chapters here in Luke, his teaching and preaching stirred the pot. Again, these last few weeks prove it, where Jesus has sharply challenged people's attachment to wealth. He's called out people who are unwilling to sacrifice in service. He's expanded the circle of forgiveness and inclusion to those whom the status quo would want to keep out. And he's confronted religious hypocrisy directly to the faces of religious power. And he's undermined glorifications of violence. Look no further than these last 6 chapters of Luke. These are controversial takes because he's challenging the comfortable, who are perhaps comfortable at the expense of others. So he's warning his followers, you want to join me in this work. You feed the hungry, you include and dignify the undesirables, and you publicly challenge greed and power. You want to join me in this? Buckle up. If we join his type of work, Jesus is telling us that resistance will almost be certain. And history proves Jesus right. The cross itself is the ultimate example of the world's resistance to his mission. It's not just a symbol for how far Jesus will go to love us. It's also a symbol of how far the world will go in resistance of Jesus' compassion and call to service. Jesus' most notable followers have faced heavy costs too. John the Baptist, beheaded after challenging corrupt power. Peter, crucified after challenging the violence of Rome. Paul, beheaded. Mary Magdalene, dismissed and slandered. Martin Luther, hunted his entire life. Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King Jr., Oscar Romero, assassinated for standing up for the poor and the oppressed. Dorothy Day, for standing up for workers' rights, defamed. Fannie Lou Hamer, beaten and jailed. This is what can happen when you follow Jesus into fighting for and standing up for your neighbors, especially those who are oppressed. And yet Jesus also says stunningly, just verses before this, in this same chapter, to this group that he is warning, he says, "Do not be afraid, little flock. It is the Creator's good pleasure to work right alongside you in pursuit of this kingdom. Yes, the cross may threaten, but resurrection is always on the other side. God is love, and love is the mission, and love will win." So what do we do with Jesus' warning? We let it strengthen our resolve. We hear it as an invitation to courage, not despair. Because if Jesus is with us, we can live boldly into holy risk for others. As the theologian Stanley Hauerwas writes, and I've quoted him before, we are here. We are here to and we can risk being peaceful in a violent world. Risk being kind in a competitive society. Risk being faithful in an age of cynicism. Risk being gentle among those who admire the tough. We can risk love when it may not be returned. We can risk all of this because we have the presence of Christ. End quote. So friends, the divisions that Jesus warns about are very real. They are the birth pangs of a world trying to be born anew. When we live into radical generosity, inclusion, and service as his followers, we will encounter pushback. And when resistance comes, as it surely will, remember, it has always been this way for those who follow Jesus into costly discipleship. And yet, through it all, the kingdom somehow seems to keep breaking in. So do not fear and keep going forth in love. Amen.